We're going to begin. It's also a little bit of a longer chapter, and I don't know if you've been following along. Yibum and Khalid, so it gets a little bit more complicated in this parak today, and a little different than some of the other conversation. The background: Yibum means that if a fellow passes away, his wife has an obligation to marry one of his brothers if they had no children. No children whatsoever, neither son nor daughter, legitimate, illegitimate. The Rambam says no child whatsoever. Then she would marry her brother. That's called Yibum. If they don't want to get married, there's the ceremony called Chalitza. It's a special ceremony by which they sever their relationship and they're done.
Rabbi,
Yes.
before, the obligation comes from both, only for the woman. The meaning is the obligation to, because she decides if she wants or not, or is the man decide? I mean, the brother.
There is a conversation between both of them. Some of the halacha we've learned already. Some we will get into a little bit today. The older brother has the precedence of the obligation, but if he says no, it goes to the other brothers. If they all say no, then it goes back to the older brother to make a decision, either Yibum or Chalitza. If their older brother leaves town, then all of the other brothers could deal with it equally. But we'll get into that a little bit later on as well. What I wanted to just set up is that when this husband passes away and this wife becomes, so to say, Yibum to the next brother, the relationship becomes a complete relationship, a marriage, only after marital relations have taken place between them. The Chachamim, that's what the Torah prescribes, that they have to live together like husband and wife. The Chachamim, the sages, prescribe something called mamar. Mamar means that you should go ahead and do what we've done by any other marriage, that you have two witnesses and that he should walk over to her and give her an object and say, I want to marry you. I want to take you as my Yibum. That's called Maimar. Maimar is a rabbinic enactment. It does not have the same validity as the Torah. Now, what happens when you have one without the other? What happens when you have two of one and not one of the other? That's what today's chapter is going to deal with. And as I said, it's not hard material, but it does get a little complicated. And hopefully we can make our way through it. All right? With that background, hopefully it all so far fits into what you've learned. We're in chapter 5, Parak K. Hayivama shenasala hayivum get krisis sala. If a yavam gives to his yibum, that means the brother gives to the wife a get, sala, upasal esara seha aleha ve'ashar ha'achin. They created their apostle. They no longer can have a relationship. Not this brother and not any of the other brothers. Because it's as if he did chalitza to her. Now, it's not technically chalitza, and we'll get into some of those details, differences, but for the moment, it's as if he said, I don't want to continue this relationship. Here's a divorce. But the sages were the ones who allowed a get, a divorce, to be part of the procedure. Since we know that a divorce can end the relationship between a properly married husband and wife anytime, therefore they allowed the concept of a get to be employed here as well to disrupt the relationship between this Yibum and this Yavama. Paisel is Yivamta Mina Yivum. And any divorce, which we learned earlier, would be applicable enough to cause the wife to no longer be allowed to marry a Kohen. That means there was a proper get with all the proper procedures, etc. Will also end the relationship between the Yibum and the Yivama. But Ve'ena Niteres Lazara Shiachlisla. She is not allowed to marry until she goes through Chalitza. Because ultimately the get was only a rabbinic enactment. Minat Torah, she needs either Yibum or Chalitza. So when he gives the get, we say, okay, so that's it. You two can no longer get married, but you still need to go through the Chalitza Torah prescribed process. Bays. The same thing on kind of this other aspect of the relationship. Hamamar. Mamar literally means a statement. That the statement that it says, I'm going to marry you as I come in front of two witnesses and make the statement, Alful Bisha in a koina. Yavama Kenyan Gomor, even though it does not acquire the Yavama in an absolute acquire. Therefore, she does not become an absolutely married woman at that moment. But get, she still needs a get because the Chachamim again wanted to make this marriage look as similar as to any regular marriage. So therefore, they said you need to make a statement in front of witnesses. And if you do that, you need to have a divorce to walk away from it. But ultimately, once again, for her to really undo this relationship, she needs this concept, this process rather of chalitza. Gimel, Kate said, what does this mean? If somebody wants to do a mimer in his yavama, wants to go over and say, I want to marry you, but he never wants to have marital relations, so he has to write her a divorce. Because through the mimar, he acted as if he betroths her, so they need to get to undo it. And then he needs to do chalitza in order to allow her to actually be free to marry anyone else. Because a Yivama cannot become allowed to others only after she's actually been involved in marital relations and then gone through a process later on of, say, he passed away, the second one, or they got a proper divorce, etc. Or after the chalitza. But if it's not one of those two, she is not free. So what is the implication of this get that he gives? It makes him forbidden to marry her because right now they've severed their relationship. But on the other hand, she's not allowed to an outside person. The mimer and a about and like we said, that the mimer does not acquire, make an absolute kinyan like beila, like relations. Dalid, number 4. So what happens if he walks over to his Yavama and he gives her a mimer in front of two witnesses, I intend to marry you. But then he goes ahead and gives her a divorce. Masha Asa Harry Botland for Hutra. So what he did nullified. So the get nullifies the mimer. Both of them are rabbinic enactments. So one can undo the other. Vigirli, and the Rambam continues, it seems to me that the Rambam says it's not that she is now free to marry anyone because she didn't do chalitza. She didn't do the proper process. On the other hand, she's no longer allowed to be married to this brother because he gave her a get. So what happens is she becomes forbidden to the one who gives the get and permitted to the other brothers. Now the other brothers have an option. Either marry her, Yibum, or Chalitza, do the process of Chalitza. Hey, the Rambam continues, doesn't get Lizikasai. If he gave a get to the lady before he gave her a mimer. In other words, he walks over to her randomly and says, technically I'm supposed to marry you because my brother passed away. You're my Yavama. Here's a get. In that case, she has become forbidden to him and to all the brothers. And then she'll need to get this divorce for the mimer if he does it. But if he continues and does the mimer, then this get will nullify the mimer. But either way, she needs chalitza, but she becomes forbidden to all the brothers. The Rambam feels in this case, because once he did that before he did anything else, it's as if he began, so to say, the chalitza process. And once one brother does the chalitza process, she's forbidden to all the other brothers. Vav 6. The Rambam is now going to give us scenarios of what's the ultimate mimer, what's the ultimate situations, and we're going to use those as we go further in understanding the various scenarios the Rambam presents. So number 1, So when somebody walks over to his Yavama and gives this intent in front of witnesses to marry her, and he did not do anything else before, right? Eloi Bolo, he says that she doesn't allow Maimer and Ikra Maimer Kasher. But then he takes her into his house and marries her properly. They have relations. That's called a Maimer Kasher. The acceptable Maimer. That's the process. The process is he walks over and makes an intent in front of witnesses to marry her, and then he marries her. But if before he did that, and the Rambam is going to continue with a whole bunch of befores or ifs or scenarios. If he gives a get or he does chalitza, whether it's from this Yibum, this brother, or this brother, whether he gives it this get or chalitza to her or to her tsarta. What is a tsarta? A tsarta, I'm not sure what there's a proper English word for it, but if she was one of two wives originally married to the first brother, then the brother passes away. So technically, the oldest brother has to do even to one of the two wives. Can't do it to both of them. To do it to one of them. So if he went ahead and gave a mimer to one and then gave a get to the other, somebody knows the proper name to call this lady. If not, we'll call it Sarta.
I think the art scroll calls it co-wife.
Co-wife. Okay, that's fine with me. Or whether he went ahead and had relations with the co-wife. Whether this brother or another brother. Or after he gave the mimer, he then gave a get to chalitza. Again, to her or to her co-wife. Whether from him, whether from the other brothers. Or after he gave a mimer to one of the co-wives, he then went ahead and gave a mimer or had relations to the other one. Whether him or a brother. Or if his brother gave another mimer or had relations. Harezim nikra mimer puzzle. All of these scenarios, the mimer is called puzzle. Whether this mimer, this intent came before all of these situations, or whether it came kind of after these situations. That these situations happened, then the mimer was given. In other words, the Rambam is still going to continue with a Ketzad in 7, but in a certain sense, basically the point is the Rambam says the proper procedure is you give an intent to get married, like a normal marriage with two witnesses, and then you take her into the house and you live happily ever after. Any change of that scenario is not a proper mimer, but therefore it's not the proper intent. And the Rambam continues in 7 Ketzad. What does this mean? Nasan get if he gave a get or chalitza to his yibum, because of another mimer law, then he turns around and gives her a mimer. So he comes over, here's your divorce, finishes it, and now I want to marry you. Whether it's him or another brother walks into the room and says, well, you gave the divorce, but I want to marry her. Or he had relations with his Yavama. Or he gave her the mimer or he gave her a mimer and said, I intend to marry you. And then it turns around and says the same intent to the co-wife. Again, whether him or whether a brother. Or he gives this intent statement to his Yibum, his Yivama. And then another brother sneaks in and says, no, I intend to marry her, or actually does go have relations and marries her. Hareza mimer puzzle. Then this intent is clearly not a real mimer. It's not a clear intent because it was both preceded or done afterwards by something that undoes it. Whether the first or the second one, either one is not considered good. Ches, the Rambam continues. Therefore, we've learned, we conclude, that this intent to marry, whether it was preceded by another intent, or a get, or chalitza, or be'ila, or relations, or whether the mimer came before these, harez a mimer puzzle. It's considered a mimer puzzle. It doesn't count. Except chutz, the only case where the mimer counts and that it works is hanoisin mimer ubal lebalo samimer. that he gives an intent to Yivama to marry her with the witnesses, and then he actually has relations and marries her. That is the proper halacha. So again, a mimer before before Gedera, before Chalitza, a mimer for one brother or a co-wife. All of these scenarios are not proper. They're possible. They don't work. The proper procedure is you go over to the Yavama, you say, I intend to marry you, and then you go ahead and get married. And that's the proper halacha the Rambam says. Test.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So does the widow have the right to institute a chalitza?
That's a good question. We're going to get into that a little bit later in this chapter, or was it in one of the other chapters? And my mind is confusing. In certain times, she has a right to say something, and the question is, what is she basing it on? I think it was in one of the chapters we may have done yesterday or the other day, and not in today's chapter.
Rabbi?
Let's finish a chapter because, to be honest, I've been learning so much about Yibum, I'm kind of confused which one's
Rabbi,
the chapter. And then at the end, we'll kind of get back to that. Remind me, please.
Rabbi,
Yes.
doesn't he must to wait 30 days or because she can be pregnant, so he must to give
Hold on.
time.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that too. Clearly, if she has a child, the whole Yibum process falls apart. So we're gonna get a conversation about that a little bit later. Again, I'm sorry for saying it like this, but I believe that may have been discussed already. If that's not in this chapter, I believe that was discussed earlier. And the moral of the story is you have to wait 90 days.
So he can't say, I want to marry you. He must to wait 90 days.
I'm sorry?
He cannot come right away after she make the brother or whoever make the chalitza and say, I want to marry her right now. He must to wait 90 days.
Correct. Correct. The question is, what if she didn't do it? And the Rambam discussed it. I believe that was in the earlier chapters.
Does he have to wait 90 days for the mimer? I mean, that's just a ceremony. That's not the.
They not have to wait for the mimer, but they cannot have to go forward because if she has a child from the original brother, she's forbidden to this brother. The only time she's allowed to marry this brother is if there was no child and the other brother passed away.
What
those variables don't work.
Why she's forbidden? I mean, if he passed away and she wanted to marry somebody else from the brothers, she have a right to do it, right?
No, in this scenario, I believe the Torah says you can't. Only way is through a Yibum. And once she and it's complicated, even if one she does with one brother, if she can go to another brother or not. But again, some of these halachas we've already gone through. Some of these are here. Some can keep going. So let's try to keep going through this chapter, and we can come back to talk more about some of these afterwards. All right. Where were we up to? Test 9. The relations, the marital relations that happens between the Yibum and the Yavama, which were either the initial part of the conversation or after the mimer, and there's nothing else. There's no get, there's no other chalitza, there's no other kids, none of the other scenarios we were talking about. It was either they went ahead and got married, or they did the mimer and got married. Nikras be'ilah ksher is called a kosher be'ilah, a kosher relationship, and therefore it's a proper process. V'im kadma mimer me'echad, like get, be'mimenu be'mechem, and if there came a mimer from one of the brothers, or there came a divorce from him or the brothers, be'im ba be'im betzarta, whether this was given or done to her or to their co-wife, or im kadma mimer betzarta, or if there was a mimer done to the co-wife, then the be'ilah is psula, because it is not the proper process of marrying her, because something else disrupts it in the scenario. Yud. Chalitza which the Yibum gave to Yivama with none of the other scenarios, nothing. I mean, he walked over to and said, I would prefer not to marry you. Let's do chalitza. And they did chalitza. Nikras chalitza me'ula. That's the best, the superior chalitza. And whether there was a get first or a mimer first, whether from him or from one of the brothers, whether from her rather, or her co-wife, then it's a chalitza pechusa. It's a little bit lower because there's something else mixed into it. Ideally, what goes on is the brother passes, not ideally the brother passes away, I apologize. If the brother passes away, ideally what happens next is that the Yibum walks over to the Yivama and does a mimer, and then they get married. Or he walks over and says, let's do chalitza. That's it. Once you start mixing all these other variables, something is not 100%. Sometimes it has major implications as we're learning, and sometimes not. That all depends. Yud Aleph, 11. Yavamis Rabbis Habois Beis Echad. One of there are many Yavamos coming from one house. The original husband was married to 5 wives. Kivat Shenivala Achas Mehem Be'ila Kishera. When one of them had a proper Be'ila, that's what we're talking about, the proper marital relations. Oy Nechlitza Chalitza Me'ula, or had a proper chalitza done, what happens, Huchuakol, all these 5 wives, all of them are now allowed to marry other men and they're free to go. Vinistalka Zikus Yibum Me'alen, and this kind of hole, this lean of Yibum, of them being a Yavama, on top of them has been alleviated, has been removed. But if one of them had done a bi'il psula, which we learned earlier means it wasn't the first thing, or you need to learn mimer puzzle, or we learned earlier to gave her a mimer that was not valid. Nestri kulun Yibum. They all become forbidden to the Yibum. And this one of the 5 who actually went through this improper or unacceptable mimer or be'ila needs a get, but the rest are all forbidden. Now, and now one of them needs chalitza. So in other words, the brother walks over and gives to one of the 5 an improper, unacceptable mimer or be'ila. What happens is she needs a get because she has to undo that, which was improper, but still was a statement. So we undo it with a get. But all of them are forbidden to him because it was done improperly. And therefore, we still need one of them at least to do a chalitza to free them. Why? Because the Be'ila Psula is not strong enough to remove a Torah prescribed Yibum. What happens if necklace achas man chalitza pechusa? If one of them did a chalitza pechusa, like we learned on the previous page, previous halachos, that if the chalitza was not superior, that means there was other things mixed into it. So this one who went through this chalitza, which was not proper, in other words, there's something else there, she's free to go. But now her co-wife also needs chalitza. Or until all the other brothers of the husband do even an inferior chalitza to that one woman. Why? See, what happens here is you have 5 wives, let's say, and 5 brothers. So one brother passes away, he has 5 wives. So the wife who had the chalitza pechusa done to her by the brother, the inferior, not so acceptable chalitza, she's free. Because ultimately her chalitza does have validity enough for her, but it doesn't have enough validity to carry over to the other sisters. Not sisters, I apologize, co-wives. So what do we do to get the other co-wives out? Either they need to all go through a chalitza, even if it's an inferior one, or we need all the brothers to come to that same first one, and all of them do chalitza to her. Because at that point, she's then accomplished chalitza for herself, enough to carry over to everybody else.
Is that rabbinic and not biblical? Because once one of them does chalitza, isn't that it on a biblical level?
I probably there's a level that has to be biblical at some level, but because it was inferior, there's too much other implications involved, so we don't want to carry it over to the others.
Okay, thank you.
Yud Gimel. Kol Yavama Shiniv Yivma. Any Yavama who went ahead and had relations with her Yavama. Ben Be'ilik Shera, Ben Be'ilik Psula, whether it was a kosher relations or non-kosher, like we learned earlier. Filu Ba'ala Achal Shechalatzla. And even if she had this relations after they did Chalitza, Ben Hu Ben Echel, whether him or one of their brothers. Ben L'Shem Mishas, Ben L'Shem Yavamo, Yavmus, whether she did it with intention of establishing a marriage or establishing this concept of Yibum, right? You can marry someone through relations. So if she comes along and they have relations after they already did Chalitza, right? Even if it was the co-wife who had the relations, whether it was any one of the brothers, because at this point, since it's after the chalitza, then she was free in a certain sense. So the relations now makes her a regular married wife, and therefore a regular married wife to undo the marriage would need a proper get. And any Yavama that was given this intent to marry, this mimer, whether it was a kosher mimer or not such acceptable mimer, like we learned earlier. You need a get to undo mimer. The way to undo a mimer process is through a get. And afterwards, just to Yisrael mimer, then that will remove the mimer. The Rambam continues, we've already learned that a get cannot free a Yavama from this Yibum hold. And also that a mimer is intent to marriage does not actually marry them properly. But relations, intimacy does create an actual kinyan, an actual proper wedding, marriage moment process. And chalitza undoes it completely. So again, mina Torah, from the Torah, the perspective is either you need a be'ila, a relations to be husband and wife after this Yibum process begins, or you need chalitza to get out of it. The mimer and the get were rabbinically added later on. Leficha, therefore, get achar get b'yavama. If a Yavama was given one get and then given another get, or a mimer achar mimer, or mimer after another mimer, moil, it will work. Aval be'ila achar be'ila ba, b'chalitza achar chalitza, ein achrein ma'elis klum. So what the Rambam is saying here, that if a Yavama is given one get after another, one mimer after another, there is an effect. It does have some validity. But if another brother, for example, would come and have relations with the Yavama, to who the other brother already began the process, or performs a chalitza with the Yavama with whom already performed the chalitza, the second process with the second brothers have no validity. And the same thing, a get or a chalitza that follows after be'ilah is also of no consequence. It doesn't count. So the Rambam is going to try to explain this to us. What is this? What is the point here of one after another? What does that mean? Ketzad, how so? 15, that's Vav. Yibum shenasan get leaving time. a Yibum which gave a get to his Yavama, because of it also get Latzarta, and then turns around and gives a get to the co-wife. Hariz also be and he is forbidden to marry the relatives of both women. You're not allowed to marry relatives of your divorcee, and since he gave them a get, the Rambam spoke about that earlier. Since we gave him a get here, he's forbidden to both of them because he gave both the women gets. And two brothers who gave one get to one Yavama. Both brothers, one brother didn't know the other one was writing a get, let's say, so they both walked over and handed her a get. She counts as if she's divorced to both of them. Both of these two brothers are forbidden within her close relatives. But still she's not free yet, because the get doesn't completely free her. So while the get's enough to imply forbidden relations from her close relatives to the brother, it doesn't allow her free until she gets chalitza. And what happens if one brother gives a get to the Yavama and another brother turns around and gives a get to the co-wife? Both of them are forbidden on the relatives of the one who they gave that get to. And also if they give a mimer after mimer, it also highlights that. But the Rambam continues, but in a case where a Yavam gives chalitza to his Yavama, and then decides to go ahead and do chalitza to the co-wife, him or a brother, or two Yavamin who did chalitza to the same Yavama, right? Levama achas. So they walked over to the one wife of the former husband, and brother A gives chalitza, and brother B gives chalitza. And chalitza include the second chalitza doesn't count. And the person who gave the second chalitza as if he did nothing, and therefore he's still allowed to marry her relatives. As if he walked over to a random lady in the street and did chalitza. There's of no value. There's nothing. The Rambam continues. If somebody had relations with his Yavama, and someone had relations with his Yavama, which is the proper way to engage and have a marriage in this scenario. And then he turns around and gives chalitza, whether to her or to her co-wife. And chalitza is a klum. It doesn't count for anything. Because once you did the proper relations, you are properly married. And then you need a proper get, etc. to get out if you get divorced later on. And same thing, if after he had proper relations, the other brother shows up and gives a get to her, who just got married, so to say, or to the co-wife, and it doesn't count. If along comes the other brother and then does a mimer, he intends to marry, or Baal or actually does have relations, it doesn't count. Since his brother did it first, and he did it properly, so it was a kinyan gamor, it counts as an absolute kinyan, as an absolute proper kiddushin. Vena kiddushin taisa beishas ish, and now she's considered an ish. She's married. And if I walk over to a married lady and say I intend to marry you, and here's a ring in front of two witnesses, it doesn't count. It's as if I didn't say anything because she's married. But if one brother goes ahead and does the proper be'ilah and gets married to one of the wives, and along comes a brother to the co-wife, and then says, I intend to marry you, or actually goes ahead and thinks he can marry her and marries her, then they'll need a get to undo that. They cannot remain married because the first brother took care of the process of Yibum, but they have to get a get. Yuzayin 17. Shnei Yavamim Sheyivnu Two Yivamim walked over and performed Yibum to two Yivamas who came from one house. And we don't know who did it first. So there are two wives from one husband. The husband dies. Two brothers walk over, one to each of them, and gives them does Yibum. Shneim Yoitzi beget, both of them need a get. For Yitrulas Arim, and then they'll be free to marry anyone else. For Asturis Liyavim, and they're forbidden to these brothers. Lefichach, therefore, Rambam gives a scenario. Reuven, Shai, Yishalayim, and Reuven live in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. For Loi Shtei Nashim, he had two wives. Achas ba'Aku, v'Achas b'Tzur. One lived in the town of Aku, and one lived in the city of Tzur. V'Shimon Echa b'Aku, v'Levi Echa b'Tzur. And he had two brothers. One brother lives in Tzur, one brother lives in Aku. V'Shamu Shemeis Reuven. And the rumor goes out that Reuven dies in Yerushalayim. The proper rule is that neither Shimon or Levi, these two brothers, one in Tzur and one in Aku, should do nothing until they hear what's the other brother. In other words, they need to get into communication with each other and say, are you doing it or am I doing it? Because we both can't do it. Sheva Kadav Yibum, because maybe one of them went and did a Yibum. So if the one in Tzur does the Yibum first, then the one in Aku can't do anything. Before one of them jumped ahead and said, I'm doing it. He walks over to the wife of his brother in his town and does Yibum with her. You don't force them to get divorced until you know if the other brother did it for sure first. On the other hand, if one of them says, I want to do chalitza right now and be done the process, we don't stop him. Ideally, we say, wait and talk to your brother. We for sure don't allow them to get married. If one of them gets married already to one of the wives, one of his sister-in-laws, we wait to find out what else happens. It's kind of in a holding pattern. If he says, I want to do chalitza right now, we don't stop him, except we would strongly suggest to wait, but we're not going to stop him from doing it. Yud Ches. 18. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time of talking about if the Yibum or the Yavama are underage of marriage or if they're not capable of marriage for whatever mental capacity, etc. Yudches, Yavam Katan Betesha Shana V'Yemechad, a young Yavam who is 9 years old in one day. Be also Kemaimer Minagadol. His relations only count like the mimer of the gadol, of the adult. That it doesn't do a proper finish the process of a proper kinyan. He's too young. And what is the halacha of a mimer that was given by a 9-year-old? Is if he went ahead and gave it. So let's say for a moment, let's try to put this in a scenario in this case. Reuven dies, and he has two brothers. One is a 9-year-old, and one is a 20-year-old. The 9-year-old runs ahead to Reuven's wife and gives her mimer and says, I intend to marry you. What happens? It's good enough that it holds him together with her, and now the 20-year-old brother can't do anything. But if he waits and the 20-year-old already comes over and says to the wife, I intend to marry you, and the 9-year-old then runs into the room and says, I intend to marry her, that doesn't matter. And the get or the chalitza done by the 9-year-old don't count for anything. Kate said, the Rambam, I'm not going to play this out. 19, what does this mean? A 9-year-old who comes and has relations with his Yavama, or gives her the suggestion, the mimer that he's going to marry her, Posla, Sharachi, and all the other brothers are forbidden to marry her now. But if an older brother over 20-year-old, comes over to the Yavama and does an intent to marry our mimer, And then the 9-year-old comes over and says to the Yavama, I'm going to intend to marry you. Or to the co-wife of his older brother. It doesn't count. And the older brothers can go ahead and continue to do what they plan to do. But if this 9-year-old then went ahead and has relations on the Yavama or on her co-wife after the older brother gave a mimer, then he's caused her to be forbidden for the older brother who already had given an intent but not completed the marriage. Like we explained before, that if two older brothers both give a mimer after the other one gives a mimer, that it causes forbidden relationship, and we have to do chalitza to get them out of that, and they have to give a get and etc. So in other words, the 9-year-old is kind of not here nor there. We're going to continue talking about these 9-year-olds going forward. So they count somewhat enough to cause some issues, but not enough to cause all issues. Chaf.
So Rabbi, the age doesn't count? He's a minor, correct? So as a minor.
Well, in halacha, a 9-year-old is when we start saying that his ability to have relations is valid as the ability to be intimate. And that's what we spoke about earlier in the other halachas of marriage, and ultimately it may imply halachas which we may deal with later on. And other halachas is to be about rape and other things that over 9 years old is already considered enough of adult. It's halacha l'meishim Sinai, that age. So here it gives it some level of validity enough to affect some issues, but not enough level of validity to affect necessarily everything yet until he's 10, 11, 12, and for sure an adult in this case. Chaf. A 9-year-old in one day who comes, it's always a 9 in one day because he has to be slightly older than a 9-year-old. And we'll learn about that a little bit more also as well. Well, maybe not, that's not here. But in other words, not an 8-year-old who just turns 9, but we have to be a little bit into the 9th year. So every time I say a 9-year-old, that's the Rambam says Tesha Shana v'Yemechad and one day. Excuse me. Sheba Yivamte, he had relations with his Yivama. And then the older brother, not aware of that, and somehow there was a miscommunication, also has relations with his Yivama. Or he gives her a chalitza. Or get, or he gives her a get. Or he says, okay, he walks and does it to the co-wife. He has relations or gives her a mimer, etc. He's a apostle or cotton. Now he's caused it to be forbidden back for the younger one. And the same thing. And same thing if the cotton comes ahead has relations with the co-wife. He had relations with the Yavama. And now he comes along and has relations with the co-wife. Or another 9-year-old comes and has relations with the Yavama or with the co-wife, then it becomes forbidden to her, like two brothers who each did a mimer. Because again, a 9-year-old in one day, we count the intimate moment only as much as a mimer by a gadol as it is suggestion by an adult. And when two mimers conflict by an adult, they become possible for both of them. So here, two 9-year-olds are having relations. It's the same thing as two adults having the mimer suggestion conflict. Chaf Aleph. If a 9-year-old comes and has relations with his Yavama, the heat deal, and then he grows up. Now he's 10, 11, 12. And he never had relations. He had relations one time when he was 9, and then they lived apart. She needs get and a chalitza. Why both? Get, like we said before, that the 9-year-old's relations is like a mimer. Whenever you have a mimer, you have to undo it with a get. V'chalitza lahatira l'zar, and she needs chalitza in order to allow her to be open to be marry anyone. Because she never had a proper relation that makes her an absolute married woman. But on the other hand, if he does continue to live with her, they got married when he was 9. And then they continued to live together happily ever after. And then they decided to get divorced 10 years later. Then she doesn't need chalitza. Because at that point, if they continued to have, after he was grown up enough, a proper be'ilah, a proper relation, so therefore they're properly married. And to undo that marriage, all you need is a get. Because the chalitza was done with when they had the relations after he grew up. Chav Beis. Echad ben Tisha Shana v'yem Echad. Whether one is 9 years old or one day, like we said, till now, or 20 years old, but did not have the 2 sires, the 2 hairs, the signs of physical maturity, which we discussed earlier in the halachos, and still have not shown any of the physical signs of impotency. So we said earlier that someone who's 20 years old and doesn't show any signs of maturity is the same as a katan, as a child. So the Rambam is saying all the halachot I'm telling you now about a 9-year-old apply as well to someone who we know has no physical maturity in these matters. Chav Gimel. Now we're going to talk about her. Kitana shirei l'mayen. We learned already earlier in the halachot that there's a concept of when a kitana gets married, either by her own desire or by her brother and mother's desire, and then she wants to get out of that marriage, she does a process called miyun. She says, I'm done, I don't want to do this, and she can leave. So Katana, who's capable of doing the process of miyun, v'acharashes, or someone who is a deaf mute, she is a deaf mute. Even though we learned earlier that both of them are married only as a rabbinic enactment. And therefore, the Rambam puts in an interesting understanding here. Shnei minei kiddushin, they're different levels of kiddushin. Kitana yesh la kiddushin. Why did we allow them to marry her off when she was young? So there shouldn't be a frivolity with her and promiscuity. So therefore, we allowed her to be comfortably taken care of by one individual. Therefore, therefore, her marriage, her kiddushin, waits to see what happens when she gets older. If she doesn't like it, she says, I'm done, miyun. If she continues and she gets older and they live together, then she's a properly married husband and wife. The charashas, on the other hand, a deaf miyun, take the law to the only reason the chachamim tried to go ahead and make extra ways to allow her to be married is she should have remained single the rest of her life. Lefichav, therefore, why is this relevant here? The Rambam says the following: if this husband, the original husband, had been married to 5 ketanos, 5 underage girls, or married to 5 deaf mutes, one time that the Yibum has relations with one of them is enough to solve all of the conversation for all 5 of them. But if one was a chareshes, a deaf mute, and one was a ketana underage, then the fact that he gets married to one of them, the Yibum gets married to one of them, does not help her co-wife. So what is she supposed to do? Malamdan as a ketana shetamai. We teach the ketana, the younger one, that she should do miyun in this scenario and walk away. The kindness the chareshes, and then the Yibum should go ahead and marry the deaf mute. The imratza legarsha, and if he wants to divorce her, and then if he wants to go ahead later on, he can go ahead and divorce as he wishes. So the ketana has an easy way out of miyun. The chareshes doesn't. So therefore we try to teach ketana to do miyun. and the Charashes goes in and gets married. And if they want to eventually get divorced, that comes later on. Chavei 25. What if one was mentally capably fine, and one was his deaf mute who halachically is a question on her marriage? If he did either marriage, or chalitza to the mentally capable one, that takes care of the co-wife, who is charashas, who is the deaf mute scenario. But the reverse doesn't work, since the charashas, her kiddushin is only midrabanan from the rabbi's enactment. Therefore, her whatever is done with her, either marriage or chalitza, cannot help her co-wife. And the same scenario would be if the original husband was married to an adult and to a child. Relations or chalitza done to the adult would allow the child to be free. But the relations with the ketana, since relations with the ketana is only a derabbanam, it's not an absolute setup minatora, would not help the gedola for her to go free, and therefore he would have to do a process of either bia or chalitza with the gedola. Chavav hayishte ketanos. If two of them were katanas, Haru Islamayan, and they both, so the original husband was married to two underage, and they were both capable of doing the process of meal to go free. And then the Yibum decided to marry one of them. And then he decided to take the other one, or one of the brothers, not knowing, has relations with the other one. The apostle has nothing to do with the first. The first it doesn't really affect because they're really both underage. But we do have to do something because it doesn't seem correct. So we teach the second that she should do mion. The one who had the first relation with the first ketana remain married. Chazai v'chim din the Rambam says so too. It's the same din. B'ketana v'charashas. If the original husband was married to a younger wife, and a charashas and the deaf mute, sheba yom tchila ketana, v'chazer b'hu charashas. That originally he planned and went ahead and had relations with one, and then either he or a brother comes along and has relations with the charashas, with the deaf mute, with the other one. Like possible as a ketana, it does not affect the first one, the ketana. But at the same time, but here, the get. But now the charashas, the deaf mute, needs a get. Why? The Rambam explains because the relations with the ketana is in a sense superior than relations with the deaf mute, the charashas. Sheketana real achazman. Because the ketana, we're only in a holding pattern, but wait a couple of years, and she will be a proper wife with all the Torah prescribed marriage. But the other case, the charashas won't. It's always the rabbana. Therefore, we should keep the ketana who he married first, and give a get to the charashas because she needs a way out, and you can't just give her a chalitza because the first one took over the Yibum, so the second one needs, like a married wife, needs to have a get. What happens if Yom Tchila Charashas? If the first Yibum decided he was going to take the Charashas to deaf mute and marry her, but then along comes he or his brother and has relations with the Ketana, Pasalas Charashas, it disqualifies the marriage to the Charashas. Therefore, what do we do to solve the situation? We teach the Ketana that she should do mion, that she should do that process of mion and go, and the Chareshet teaches us get, and then the Chareshes will be given a get, and she will be able to go. If one of the wives was Pikeach, was competent, Vachas Charashes, one was a deaf mute, is ba Yibum ala pikachas v'chazir ba huayachem ala charashas. So first they came on, the Yibum comes along and marries and has relations with the one who's pikach, who's mentally competent. V'chazir ba huayachem ala charashas, then either he or his brother have relations with the charashas, with the deafness. Like pasalas to pikachas, it does not disqualify or affect the pikachas. Why? Because the mentally capable one is a Torah prescribed marriage, and the Yibum therefore is Torah prescribed, and the other one is only rabbinic. The charashas strichas get, but she does need something to go free, so the deaf mute gets a get. But Yibum ala charashas chazar hu echav bala pikachav. And here is what's if it's the reverse, that they had the relations originally Yibum with the charashas, with the deafnit, and then either he or a brother goes ahead and has relations with the pikachas, with the mentally competent one. So here's the reverse. The original one was not a Torah prescribed one. And the second one is postal as a charashas. That second one disqualifies them from remaining married to the first one with the deaf mute. The charashas yitzas beget, so therefore she needs a get because she needs something to end that situation. But the pikachas beget for chalitza. But the pikachas now needs both a get and a chalitza. She can't just have a get because the charashas did not solve her yibum lien that's been on her. Therefore, she needs chalitza also, but she needs a get because she had something else, like we said earlier, in place. So the get is to take off what they did, and the chalitza is to take off the yibum. Finally, the last one, lamed hayu gedayla kitana. Ubal gedayla, if the original wives were both an adult and a child. Ubal gedayla, and then the yibum chooses the gedayla, the adult. But then either he or one of his brothers had relations with the child. Like Pasalas Gedayla does not affect the Gedola because she was a proper relations for the Yibum done properly from the Torah. So we teach the Ketana that she should be miyun, she should go through this process of miyun to leave. What if it's reversed and the Yibum chooses the child, the Ketana, and then either he or a brother has relations with the adult? We teach Ketana now that she should be do miyun, but in this scenario we tell her keep the Gedola and remain married as for the Yibum. Should be a loss of Konakin because the relations that they had counts Minatar as proper. So that marriage and that Yibum relationship is a proper Minatar one. So if the Ketana does miyun, because she will then be solved. And so if they end her relationship, then the Ketana can remain married. And that ends chapter 5.